So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and to the first of two battles that have been given to me by the Womb Raider on the new test build on maps, which I believe at least one he created, although possibly both. This one, Snow Grantham, is the name of the replay, although I believe I'm going to have to take a little bit of creative liberty with regards to what I actually named this settlement. Grantham is the name of some sort of character in a period drama, I think, or some sort of location in a period drama. I don't know why that's sticking out in my head. I've got very limited knowledge of such things, but I'm sure that's the case. But regardless of that, we are going to see a unified theme here as well. Under normal circumstances, we're used to snowy maps like this being associated with the northwest of Middle-earth, but here it's going to be more along the lines of the northeast, because we are going to be seeing Erebor joined by a couple of the other more eastern-based factions in the Rhovanion, and Dorwinion joining them on the defence today, with these natural canyons which weave their way through more limited buildings in all fairness, but with relatively small choke points. Maybe this is an opportunity for the defenders to finally mete out a victory on one of these test build battles. I hope for my sake they do, otherwise I'm sure I'll get an earful about it once again. However, as if to counteract what I've already said, one of the factions from the northwest in the Kingdom of Rhudaur will be marching with the forces of evil today on the attack. We have seen Rhudaur recently as well defend their own capital, although to be fair I haven't actually recorded that battle yet, although I know it will take place before this one, so it's possible we will have already seen the defenders win one of these maps. Anyway, Rhudaur certainly have the tools to make a siege battle their own, particularly when it comes to their damage dealing capabilities. However, just as important here are going to be their numbers and their ability to withstand a decent amount of punishment. The Rhudaur clansmen here are a perfect example of that. I mean, under normal circumstances, Rhudaur, when it comes to taking damage, are not the best, but with their big shields, the Rhudaur clansmen, at least when it comes to arrow fire, can certainly do that. Without the armour upgrade, they're a little bit more fragile in sustained melee with better infantry than themselves. Coldfell Maidens, this is the first time we've seen the Coldfell Maidens in the new patch. They of course don't have a new unit model. They were already fairly good for what they were, certainly very high res. The Coldfell Maidens also form another important aspect of the Rhudaur force, simply because Rhudaur certainly don't lack for javelins, but javelin cavalry like this make them a very good anti-cavalry force, and with the cavalry rebalancing that has gone on, a unit like this is going to be more important in the meta now, I think, to counteract enemy forces trying to sally forth into you. Also bound up in that, the Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters, of course, spears in melee, well armoured for a Rhudaur unit, but also yet more throwing projectiles, and the punch that these javelins offer going to be very, very important when it comes to dealing with the heavily armoured units that all of the defending factions have today. Though of course, especially when it comes to the quality of the dwarves, Rhudaur have the armour piercing to be able to equalise the quality gap that exists between the two factions. Rhudaur swordsmen, on the other hand, very much the rank and file of Rhudaur, more numerous than many of the other Kingdoms of Men infantry units, especially their fellow Arnorians, and this is counterbalanced by the fact that, of course, individually speaking, their armour in particular lets them down a little bit defensively, but that's only relative to their fellow men. When it comes to comparing them to the more numerous units of orcs, the Rhudaur swordsmen actually compare fairly favourably, and still don't lack for numbers, so that's something. Granadine pikemen represent the best anchor that the Kingdom of Rhudaur can field. The shields also mean that enemy archers are not going to have their own way with them quite so often, and not to the same extent, but yeah, the Granadine pikemen, very important for backing up some of the flimsier units that Rhudaur often traffic in. We also have a catapult here manned by still the unlocalised placement text, an artillery crew unit wielding a two-handed spear, which Rhudaur seem to share with Dunland. The two-handed spear, of course, and how numerous they are means that cavalry won't be able to simply wipe them all out in one charge and expect to have it all their own way. And finally, the two bodyguard units, which still remain unchanged for Rhudaur as well. The the dedicated armour-piercing shock infantry unit in the Witch Realm Enslavers, and then the Granadine Berserkers, which represent largely the same sort of thing, only they are a little bit weaker in melee, but do have a ranged attack which they can use first. So, moving on, we then have the Dominion of Isengard, played by Tommy the Rage Quitter. He, of course, has also been a big contributor to the channel over the course of the past year. Uruk-hai archers, long-range skirmishing is not really Isengard's wheelhouse. They can engage in it with these Uruk-hai archers, though of course their true range potential lies elsewhere. in these Uruk-hai crossbows. This is the kind of map where attacking crossbows, are going to be more difficult to use, which is probably a good thing, because attacking crossbows can be utterly devastating to the defender's chance of winning battles such as this. But we'll see. It's going to be one of those things which the defenders definitely need to keep track of. Trolls have been a matter of discussion of late, or at least on my channel they have been. Trolls of the White Hand also represent some of the strongest trolls in the game, so they're going to be even more effective, individually speaking, than something like the Trolls of Angmar that we've already seen. Having said that, I do think trolls are balanced with... they are balanced with intelligence in mind by the developers, I would suggest. We'll see. I hope they're not too dominant in this battle, because I don't want them to be, because I know the thinking behind trolls in this current version of the game. So I do hope that they don't prove me wrong and bulldoze through entire sections of the settlement like they were able to in the Angmaran towns, but we'll see. Uruk-hai archers, we've got some guards of Orthanc here as well, a much more defensive unit than many of the other high-end Isengard forces, some Dunlanders that still form up Saruman's personal guard. We also have the Isengard Ballista, largely unchanged I believe as well, a very effective siege weapon, albeit one of the more expensive ones in the game. It does have certain downsides as well. Its arc of fire, like with any ballista, is going to be fairly linear, and given the fortifications that are in the way, it's not going to be the easiest thing to use, but defensive lines are not going to be safe with it around by any means. Nazkai, another armour-piercing bodyguard unit, exactly the sort of thing, which is going to be able to deal a lot of damage against the armoured units on the defence, as will the Uruk-hai Berserkers, albeit they are going to be a little bit more flimsy as the battle goes on. And finally, a glut of Uruk-hai pikemen and infantry to form up the backbone of an Isengard force, which is very typical, of course. It's fairly expensive, especially for an Orcish army, to field them in numbers such as this, especially when you're on the attack and it's a 4v4 and all of that. But I think it's still worth it. Isengard bringing this mid-tier quality that they're known for really does differentiate them a little bit from their fellow evil men, or evil men and orcs. Speaking of evil men, though, we do have the wild men of Dunland, and it'll be interesting to see them march alongside the Kingdom of Rhudaur today, given how similar... they do share some similar things, although Dunland certainly have their own certain eccentricities, mainly, of course, crossbows. Crossbows, we've already mentioned how effective they can be in Isengard's hands, and Dunland have imported some of them as well, and the mounted Ravenborn Wardens make for a very difficult unit to deal with if the defenders were intending on sallying out and trying to do some damage with cavalry, because those bolts and their effectiveness in melee with those maces are going to be difficult to overcome. The Danish Huntsmen, we've seen them be fairly effective recently as well, on one of Tommy's maps no doubt. The Danish Huntsmen, however, don't have the kind of armour values that you would want from a skirmishing archer, much the same way that the Uruk-hai archers don't. Potentially some hidden archers that Rhudaur can bring suffer from the same sort of thing, so perhaps grindy archer-based skirmishing is not going to serve the attackers too well here. We also have some Danish Huskarls, so some armour-piercing axemen. Not too surprising to see a unit such as this in the hands of a more tribal kingdom of men. Very, very typical for the sort of thing you would expect to find from Harad or Rhudaur, that sort of thing. And armour-piercing, of course, as we've already mentioned, will be very useful for the attackers today. The Danish Warband, we have here a slinger unit, so slingers can be surprisingly savage given their low base damage, but then they also have quite a lot of armour, or quite a lot of ammo, and they are armour-piercing. I don't know though, this is the kind of settlement where ranged units for the attackers, it very much depends on how much ground the defenders are willing to give and where they choose to make their stands. Yeah, slingers, we shall see. Dunlanding pikemen, a more basic unit of pikes certainly than their allies from Isengard are used to utilising, but of course cheap pikes, or cheaper pikes like this, can still be very, very effective as the battle goes on for the attackers, as eventually the defenders are going to run out of options to deal with them, and then it's the slow death by 1,000 cuts, or pokes in this case, for them. And at the back we have a couple of units of the Ravenborn Wardens, very nasty crossbow bolts once again on foot. They may not be as heavily armoured as they used to be in Dunland's old form with the Spears of Orthanc, but they are still the same sort of unit. Otherwise, crossbows first and foremost, and then bodyguard spears in melee. And having two units of them, of course, only adds to the kind of pain they want to inflict. And finally, we have another Isengard force, this under the command of Winter's Might, in his natural habitat, I suppose, rolling around in the snow. Once again, Uruk-hai Berserkers and Nazkai forming up an armour-piercing core, again with the Guards of Orthanc, so going fairly quality-heavy here, the attackers, which is all well and good, but you're not going to be able to out-quality a force like the Dwarves, even if Isengard do have some really good options, and Rhudaur and Dunland both have a lot of armour-piercing. You're not going to be able to just grind through the Dwarves in the way that maybe the attackers are hoping for with these kind of builds. maybe a mistake, but we'll see. It does, of course, give them more grounds for going toe-to-toe with some of the high-quality units they're undoubtedly going to run across. Several units of Uruk-hai infantry, some units of Uruk-hai pikemen, again, another unit of Trolls of the White Hand, more limited in number than the Trolls of Angmar, but that only goes to... That should cement in your mind how individually potent these guys now are. And then some Uruk-hai crossbows here, and some champions of the White Hand. So they're not lacking for fast movers, and not lacking for anti-cavalry on their own mounts here are the attackers. So sallying out is probably not going to be the easiest thing in the world, but let's see if the defenders are going to want to do that. We start off with the Wound Raider playing as Dorwinion, and immediately we see there is something of an idea to do so with some hidden Morroquendi stalkers. Of course, it should go without saying that the Wound Raider playing as the Dorwinion army that's on the defence today. Poison projectiles, good amount of damage for a horse archer, though of course foot archers can be a real concern for them, though in slightly lower numbers. Perhaps horse archers, well, the foot archers of the attackers are in low enough numbers. I think the horse archers like this can actually be really effective, but they are micro-intensive, and you only really see the results of them over a longer period of time. They're not going to be spectacular quickly. You're going to have to play the long game with them, so will the Wound Raider have the necessary patience? The main bulk of his army, however, unsurprisingly being made up of the Elvalin, and in all fairness, they are a dependable force. The armour piercing will worry them, but against the rank and file, especially of Dunland and Rhudaur, they will be pretty damn good. They will struggle a little bit more, I think, in terms of sheer damage against the slightly more expensive Uruk-hai infantry. But again, the Uruk-hai are going to be a little bit more limited in numbers. They don't make up the entirety of the attacking force, so they should be just fine. We've got some river patrol in here, of course, now coming equipped with a shield, makes them a little bit more resilient, but ultimately they are still a low-end javelin where you're going to do some decent damage with them at range first and foremost for their cost, but as soon as you ask them to be a melee unit, they're really just going to be there as a meat shield. And of course, it ends up being in most of these battles that all of the defenders have to get involved in melee at some point or another. Morroquendi pikes offer the kind of damage values which maybe even the Uruk-hai pikemen don't, but their armour values and their overall fragilities do make them something of a weaker link defensively in comparison to the more armoured Uruk-hai, and of course the shielded Rhudaur pikemen, though of course they will outperform the more basic Dunlanders fairly comprehensively, but it really matters what you're after. In all fairness though, the defensive fragilities by comparison shouldn't be too much of a concern if the defenders pick their defensive spot correctly. Nandor Glade Guard offer a bit more damage, which is going to be useful of course, and if you can shock the enemy into submission, especially the wild men contingent of this attacking force, you should be onto a winner. Morroquendi bows, of course, the dismounted version of the horse archer we've already seen, and poison projectiles with their morale debuff will be useful. Once again, the wild men will probably flee before the slightly bulkier Uruk-hai, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. The Elvalin Hammer Guard are in here as well. We saw them nearly pull out a victory for Dorwinion when we saw them try to defend Karasant a few weeks ago. On this occasion, however, they are going to want to fight the Uruk-hai, perhaps more so than the others, to try and get the most out of their armour piercing. Now then, moving on to Medexa playing as the Kingdom of Rhovanion. We've seen them actually be very effective in the battles that we've seen them take part in, the tribal elements of their army being a little bit more of a supporting role, and of course the tribal levy skirmishers being the javelin. I'm sure we'll see the slingers around here somewhere as well. They make up the two throwing projectile units, which, given they are the defenders, they should be able to use with greater freedom than the attackers, though it is going to be a bit of a pit fight in that regard. Tribal berserkers represent something which wouldn't be out of place in either Dunland or Rhudaur, offering again that armour piercing damage that they need. You lean on the tribal berserkers for their melee damage a little bit more so. The Rhovanion, most of their infantry, when it comes to higher quality infantry, is a little bit more defensive, and they rely on shock values from their cavalry and then supporting ranged units mostly, but the tribal berserkers are the exception to that rule, and they should find their home facing off against Isengard quite nicely. We've got some Rhovanion archers here. Heavy archers shouldn't be too much of a problem for the defenders, although it must be said Dorwinion didn't bring too many, and of course Erebor traffic in mostly crossbows, though given the fact that they can fortify where they like, that shouldn't be too much of a concern. But if they do get involved in a skirmish fight, the Rhovanion are going to do the heavy lifting there. The Rhovanion nobles are the bodyguard tier unit that the Rhovanion have at their disposal. Of course, more defensive in nature, they will struggle against stuff like the Enslavers and the Nars-Kai, but other than that they should be very good at dealing with the rank and file. Rhovanion phalanx are another shielded unit of pikes, of course, and overall in terms of their equipment they are a little bit more well endowed than the Rhudaur pikemen of Rhudaur. I don't know how important the shields are going to be, but it is a nice feather in their cap, and they're going to have the Hoplons in and amongst them. Of course, the Rhovanion class of unit doesn't have a standard line infantry unit, they only have the spears to go alongside the pikes, which does make them a thoroughly defensive outfit when you consider that spears do quite well on the defence. That spear malice will harm them a little bit, but against the likes of Dunland you don't necessarily need the highest attack values to still be pretty effective. More Hoplons in here, we have some tribal levy spears, a basic unit of infantry indeed, though very numerous, so in terms of numbers the defenders are not going to be bullied too hard. Slingers here, we already mentioned a bit of them in this, the first example of them we've seen. The Rhovanion nobles I think are going to struggle to really spread their wings, so to speak, in this battle, purely because of the amount of anti-cavalry that the attackers have at their disposal. We've seen some horse archers from Dorwinion which may be effective, but the Rhovanion nobles are outright shot cav, so they need to be used aggressively to get the most out of them, but I don't know, it's going to take a lot of hard work from the Medexes to really get the best of them. Tribal levy spears, more Hoplons and more phalanx. And then finally, the final two armies, we have two forces of dwarves from Portaleno and Y2K, and they're kind of mixed together I think, but the level of quality the dwarves can bring to this sort of thing, Erebor, or the Kingdom Under the Mountain as they are henceforth known, they're going to be difficult to wear down. The armour piercing is going to have to be leaned on quite heavily by the attackers. Erebor legionaries in particular, they are the best unit of standardised line infantry that we've seen on the field today, and they're going to have a grand old time against most of what the attackers have individually. There are a few exceptions to that. Again, the very high tier armour piercing troops will do quite nicely against them, but Erebor should be backing them up appropriately to the point where that isn't the be all and end all. And Ironfoot axe throwers make for some very good backup indeed. They're going to be good at slicing through stuff like the Danish Huskars, like the Uruk-hai Berserkers, and like any of the pike units that the attackers have on display. Ironfoot warriors with the armour upgrade, again, dwarven basic line infantry like this tends to be a step above much of what the rest of the game has to offer, even when in comparison to the elves. I think the elven basic line infantry is too light for the job that it's often tasked to do. That's not something you can accuse the dwarves of when they pack on the armour like this. Again, the armour piercing, it does make armour piercing the obvious go-to against them, of which the attackers do have a fair amount of options there, but I think the armour and the shields and all of that sort of thing in these kind of pit fights is exactly what you need. Some dwarven miners here at the front just to help absorb a bit of damage, and of course they are an armour piercing militia unit. Some more Rhovanion units tucked into this little nook. To make our way across, we do have some Ironfoot pikes, yet another shielded pike unit, so they're not super common still, but we are seeing several factions that do have access to such a thing, and the Ironfoot pikes of course make for a very good anchor to a dwarven line. Of course, it's always the temptation as the dwarves to go pretty heavily into your bodyguard units, and with Dragon Slayers and with Obsidian Guard, Portaleno has done that as well, but the Sons of Durin are kind of similar to the Sons of the Fallen now in the sense that they are a very high tier but non-bodyguard unit. Of course, 123 of them, it does give them a little bit more of an aggressive edge with those numbers as well. Plenty of armour piercing damage coming their way. And unsurprisingly, Ironfoot crossbow is going to be an absolutely vital unit for the defenders here. The attackers have no real choice but to march into them. The Ironfoot crossbows as well are going to be pretty good at absorbing basic arrow fire with the armour and the shields on their backs. They don't really want to get involved in a crossbow war though. The attackers might not want to take that either. It's the sort of thing which can go badly for both sides here, depending on the exact circumstances. Y2K, we have some more Ironfoot warriors and more Ironfoot pikes down here. Ironfoot crossbows already up on these natural walls. Very similar sorts of things here, perhaps a little bit heavier into the Sons of Durin. More axe throwers, more Erebor legionaries as well. Obsidian Guard, very similar units we're seeing so far. But of course the dwarves, perhaps somewhat predictable, but obviously when you're on the defence like this you want to be. Blacklock engineers as well, specialty crossbows, exactly the sort of thing which can do a ton of damage very quickly. Ironfoot pikes and some defending artillery as well, the dwarven catapults with the associated crew in tow, and I think that's just about it. Plenty of areas to fall back to. I will make a little cut because the attackers will likely want to do a bit of marching before they simply charge straight into the jaws of this defence. So yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the first ranks are clashing. So with the rather rapid advance of the attackers here, I don't know if this was intended to be a full ambush or not, but the Coldfell Maidens are going to struggle under the weight of these elven arrows here, and under normal circumstances, of course, like I said, the Coldfell Maidens are pretty good anti-cavalry tools, but you can see just how damaging the missiles from the Morroquendi Stalkers are, so That was actually fairly effective, fairly quickly. It also does go to expose, once again, Rhudaur's slightly lower armour scores. So that is not bad, but this cavalry is going to have to retreat within the settlement, you would suggest. There's not really enough room to kite the entirety of the Rhudaur army around, and at the very least Filler is doing the right thing by sweeping forwards with his Rhudaur clansmen first and foremost. The other armies on the field taking a little bit more time over moving into position, but that is a little bit more understandable. There is also the small matter, of course, of the fact that Dorwinion need to pretty much completely organise themselves within the settlement, considering their deployment zone didn't extend within this area. This is a rather strange, a sort of a labyrinth style section of the map over here. Rather simplistic choke points that Dorwinion can utilise, but I don't know. I don't really know matchup wise how this is going to play out. I mean, the Elven units and the Morroquendi should be pretty good against Rhudaur, but I think the rank and file of Dorwinion may struggle a little bit against some of these really damaging units. I mean, you've got the Franadine Berserkers, Ferocious Javelins, Blackwolves, all of which in the last battle where we saw Rhudaur try to defend their own capital were all pretty damn effective against fairly high-end opposition. It's going to be fairly tough on Dorwinion damage-wise, but we've already seen a slightly more fragile nature of Rhudaur here. Interesting to see the Morroquendi Stalkers threaten to move forward again. Rhudaur not yet advancing fully into what we will refer to as the settlement, even though the buildings are a little bit further back beyond this maze-like section of the city. Erebor, meanwhile, his Isengard forces, a little bit of damage being done going after the Isengard ballista crew. I mean, we have mentioned, of course, how devastating an artillery weapon this can be, and this is probably the best place on the map to utilise it. The Rhovanion are in fuller view as the Dwarven artillery starts to streak across the sky and hit Winter's Might's units as well. Spearguard moving forward from Tommy. Yeah, forcing that ballista back with the archers. Definitely a good move. And so far, we're still only seeing defending artillery being used. Ironfoot axe throwers as well joining in, albeit that's a blank fire. I don't know what they were going after. Half-Orc Spearguard and Uruk-hai infantry may not be the best targets for throwing axes like that. But we'll see. Still stacking up, really. There may have been that initial ambush, but for now, the attackers are still just trying to shift themselves into the correct position. Rhudaur archers and Ironfoot crossbows will be the order of the day over here for the defenders. Rhudaur slowly shifting their way forwards. Not surprising to see the spears be effectively the minesweepers here. If I were Dorwinion, I would probably be moving my cavalry further back into the settlements at this point. There's not really going to be too much of an opportunity to get through all of Rhudaur's spears, and perhaps the cavalry can find gaps at the front of the settlement where there is a little bit more open space. A couple of dead Rhovanion archers there. Tribal Levy slingers doing the same. Dunnish huntsmen firing away. As I mentioned, I think we've seen a straight up skirmish fight. The Rhovanion would be able to defeat Dunland without too many issues. What's going on over here? Franadine Rangers getting into a good position. So the path have they taken to get up there? By the way, Rhudaur taking advantage of one of the slightly less obvious aspects of the map, although they are only going after slingers, and rangers, while they are a little bit different than how they used to be, they are still a very valuable tool. Those slingers could be a concern if this amount of damage is consistent. Again, they are only going after Half-Orc Spearguard, but trying to peel away the attackers' manpower is important. surely the attacker's moving into place. There's a lot of damage the Rangers did pretty quickly, honestly. That will be of concern, I'm sure. Ironfoot Warriors waiting. Again, Ironfoot Axe Throwers mean Erebor are in a position where they can take a good amount of punishment, but crossbows, of course, really take away from a lot of the effectiveness that Erebor's armour and shields offers them in a long-range duel. So yeah, it's not too surprising to see the Ironfoot Axe Throwers retreat from this position, as good as it would be to hit the Axe Throwers from the side, or hit the infantry with the Axe Throwers from the side, I should say. Isengard on the way forwards, perhaps. More missiles. Again, Danish Huntsmen, so not quite as devastating as the crossbows, but the Rangers also very, very deadly. The first melee engagement we have, really, and it's some tribal levy spears getting engaged by the advanced party of half-orc spearguard, who are already shaken. They are fairly far ahead, but with the support coming forwards from the trolls and the Uruk-hai infantry, that shouldn't be of too much concern, I would suggest. Rhovanion have got a rather interesting area to have to try and defend here, with the water kind of narrowing the battlefield in certain areas, but there's also many pathways where they're going to have to try and defend. Do they have the manpower to be able to do that? Do they have the quality to be able to do that on multiple fronts, or are they going to be reliant on tribal units exclusively in some areas? Isengard should have the quality to be able to deal with that. Well, London Glade Guard seem to have moved forward at some point, taking a quick nibble. Erebor's Troll Hunters moving forward to perhaps try and whittle down some of the Dorwinion forces, but that is all the excuse that the Morroquendi Stalkers need to once again start firing away. But you can see that with their armour, the Erebor's Troll Hunters are significantly more hardy than the Coldfell Maidens. They've already taken a fair amount of damage. Rhudaur clansmen moving in to block the charge. It would have impacted on the Erebor's Troll Hunters. Of course, they themselves are spears too, so I don't think it would have been the end of the world anyway, but they want to make sure that those javelins can keep firing. It is a fair amount of damage that is slowly being done, however, and ultimately these Troll Hunters, the only thing they're really achieving is whittling down a unit of Elvelyn, which the most basic of units that Dorwinion can field, and also hit in from the side as well with Andor Glade Guard moving forward once again, and they should do pretty damn well against something like the Rhudaur clansmen. That elven damage. And still the poison projectiles move forwards. Isengard moving forward with some real gusto now, moving over this bit of raised terrain. The dwarves still do have the elevation advantage, but the situation could get a little bit ugly. Ironfoot Warriors upgraded and Uruk-hai infantry kind of similar in terms of the level of quality they represent. The Snaga are in very close proximity, and so far the crossbows, what are they actually firing at? Inconclusive for now. They are cranking the bolts. Half-orc Spearguard are down there again. They're a little bit far ahead of their support. Sons of Durin are going to be able to surround them, and Isengard doing quite well in the other engagement, but this one's not likely to end well for them at all, and indeed they end up breaking under not too much pressure from the crossbows either. Support just a little bit too far afield. Champions of the White Hand moving in. They don't want to stay in sustained melee with the Sons of Durin by any means. That armor-piercing damage is going to be nasty. That one unit of Ironfoot Warriors, however, will be surrounded and surely defeated. Are they simply going to be shot in the back, I wonder? Possibly. I mean, with the javelins as well, that's going to... No. Firing into the main body of the Dwarven units, I do think that's the right thing to do. Sons of Durin are going to move back behind the rest of the infantry, and over here Dunland moving forward, the miners standing in the way, the mounted Ravenborn, more trolls as well. Dunland not going to be quite as hardy in melee as their natural allies Isengard, but as for some of their supporting tools, they can still give the dwarves a torrid time. Meanwhile, Snaga Skirmish is continuing to take arrow fire. Tribal levy spears still standing in the way. I mean, there's not really been a huge amount of movement over here. This unit of half-orc spear guards still fighting on the front line against this unit of tribal levy spears. Not the most important units involved for either side. Isengard sending forward some Uruk-hai infantry though. That's going to be a bit of a raising of the stakes. How interested are the Rhovanion in maintaining this one defensive position? This is a little bit unfortunate though. You can see the carcasses of 2 catapults, only 1 remains under Medex's command, and that is almost certainly a result of the Isengard ballista wherever that's been moved to. Sniping out artillery, however, fairly easy task. Meanwhile, Danish Huntsmen now out of ammunition, being sent into melee against the dwarves. I mean, unsurprisingly, they are a dual-wielding unit, so they actually do have a decent amount of utility in melee, but it's not going to be enough to increase their damage to the point where you back them against Ironfoots. They're just here to keep up the pressure, I think, so far, based on what we've seen. The most likely place the attackers can seize the initiative is over here. You can see that Isengard are making progress, and the retreats that Erebor had to mount from some of the areas is something that Winter's Might has been able to take advantage of. Uruk-hai infantry being lent on for the heavy lifting here. Trolls moving across. We've yet to see the trolls commit themselves to melee. Isengard waiting for the opportune moment, which is the right thing to be doing. Ironfoot crossbows moving themselves, Blackhawk engineers. I mean, if they're getting involved in just sort of a crossbow versus crossbow slog, that is something which favours the attackers more. The defenders really need something like the Ironfoot crossbows to be used on the advancing infantry columns, rather than being baited into this kind of nonsense. The Blackhawk engineers moving forward as well, so I mean they're going to have to do something about those Isengard crossbows, otherwise, as I said, the attackers will have the better of that and they'll be very pleased about it. Defeat seems certain for Isengard. On the front line though, still not committing forward any more direct infantry units, content instead to continue to use their basic javelins and the like. Half-orc spear guard could move forward to keep this assault going, because those Uruk-hai infantry are not going to last too much longer. And the Sons of Durin represent the kind of unit that Isengard will struggle to deal with. Armor-piercing ideal for dealing with the Orthanc-made plate armour. Meanwhile, things looking a little bit chaotic over here. Dorwinion having some units which simply won't be able to retreat. They back themselves into a corner. I guess this is... it simplifies things a little bit as the attacking artillery starts to fire in. Not using flaming shot, interestingly enough. Again, they could get friendly fire just as easily. It's hitting Dorwinion based on the shape of the engagement. It is a little bit weird. I mean, under normal circumstances I would say chaos like this favours the attackers, but here, I don't know. I mean, Rhudaur are getting... it's going to be easier for them to go after certain targets here, Dorwinion, with their archers. I mean, they're trying to kill off more of the Etenmoor's troll hunters. Black Wolves are moving forward. Good crossfire as well. So they're going to be able to hit several units in the back. So the shields, which in many cases are Rhudaur's only real defence against arrows, are also going to be lowered in terms of effectiveness. Van infantry though will not do so well against Black Wolves in the long run. More units moving in. I mean, I still think if Rhudaur are willing to commit to this, they can make this work in their favour. But if they do start to flag a little bit, maybe it is the sort of thing that Dorwinion can take full advantage of. Moving more archers. I mean, a big part of Dorwinion's defence here is archers. We hop over to the other part of the settlement. The Rhovanion continuing to rather happily hold the line, although we do have trolls in melee now. Tribal levy spears surely are going to struggle, although there are tribal berserkers in there. They've already done a real number on one of the units of Uruk-hai infantry that moved over here, but now they're going to have to do the same against the trolls. Tribal berserkers represent far and away, I would say, the best Rhovanion unit for trying to deal with trolls. There's also quite a lot of rocks from the slingers coming in. And in all fairness, the trolls do seem to have been stifled a little bit in terms of their effectiveness, which is heartening to see. I was a little bit worried. We don't want to be seeing another domineering performance by them, but so far the Rhovanion able to bottle them up without too many issues for now. Tribal levy skirmishers getting into position, so again, we have seen pretty much every time the Rhovanion have been on the field, it has been rather interesting to note that perhaps the more eye-catching units have actually been the tribal ones. The Rhovikin units, the high-tier, more heavily armoured units, are more functional for the Rhovanion, whereas the difference between victory and defeat can often be the throwing projectiles and the berserkers and the like. And so it may prove to be against Isengard here. Meanwhile, not a huge amount of ground being gained by Dunland, throwing themselves against the Dwarven front line. More infantry has since arrived, and Erebor legionaries also represent exactly the kind of unit which basic Dunnish warband are not going to be able to overcome. Axe throws are in place as well, and well, there goes the Dorwinion general. Could be a concern for later. As I was saying, axe throwers though should be very, very good against Dunland. Forward come some Dunnish Huskarls. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Erebor feeling confident. Indeed, why shouldn't they? The situation is looking fairly rosy for them on this front line at the moment. The addition of some armour piercing might be a concern for later. For now. Meanwhile, Isengard looking like they're going to try and overwhelm this defensive position. Pikes were added by the dwarves, but again, numbers proving to be a concern. These guards of Orthanc trying to push their way through the front line, and they will succeed in that by the looks of it. Cavalry moving in as well. I mean, that will help with the mass pushing, but if the pikes manage to maintain their formation for just a little bit longer, they could end up dealing with a potentially dangerous foe in the Champions of the White Hand. And for axe throwers, the trolls over here should be a little bit more effective because Erebor are simply thinner on the ground and they don't have the necessary support in place really to be dealing with the trolls. Spears in tow. I mean, Winter's Might still has a decent amount left. I think this is where the attackers have been at their strongest. The guards of Orthanc have pushed their way in behind enemy lines, but the Obsidian Guard will be there to meet them. And in that matchup you would back the dwarves, although it's still a little bit messy, I have to say, from the dwarves over here. They should have been able to see this disaster coming. Now they're going to have to retreat all of their crossbows. They're going to have to set up a new front line. Going to have to peel themselves off this melee engagement as well in order to do so. So there's going to be a few more losses they're going to incur, which is not ideal. As the trolls start to move forward, I mean, there are good opportunities for, well, the catapult has sort of slid off the hill, but one of those rare situations where it may actually be to the defender's benefit. They're not going to be able to move it any further, so it's going to be sort of ride or die here. Try and bank these shots long. Interesting that Isengard are not heading over. Oh no, they are. I was going to say Champions of the White Hand moving in, giving Dunland a little bit of a helping hand, and so far actually it's been interesting to note that the dwarves have probably been the least effective of the defenders. That doesn't have anything to do with them as a faction. I think it's just the position they were in, and I think maybe the defending players here have been outplayed a little bit so far. Over here though, I mean, to be fair, Isengard have started to make progress over yonder too. Although these berserkers really did a number on those trolls, so that's the blueprint for dealing with trolls. And they're going to continue to carve their way through these half-orcs as well. Defending cavalry charging in. Managing to get a good charge up onto the Snaga skirmishers as well. They need to get out of there though. Rhovikin archers. I thought they were routing for a second then, but no, they are not. Some Erebor forces as well defending one of the routes. The Rhovanion are still not retreating fully from this area though, so they do intend to keep mounting a resistance. Interesting that once again the guards of Orthanc are in the vanguard trying to take advantage of the newfound map control that the attackers are gaining. in the front of the settlement. Are they gaining map control over here though? Doesn't look like it. In fact, they have been forced back, really, you'd have to say, although Granadine Pikemen, once again, proving to be an effective anchor for Rhudaur. Poison arrows streaking through the sky. I mean, if Rhudaur do start showing signs of weakness, those poison arrows are exactly the sort of thing which will finish them off just that little bit more quickly. Watching Javelins defeat seems certain, that's a little bit surprising. Still a Coldfell Maiden or two around here, but yeah, with Frodrum Javelins and melee and Troll Shiraxos, I really don't think that the Alvalan infantry will be victorious overall, already shaken, even though there are still quite a few of them left in the unit. Some more Troll Hunters. Many of them remaining, but it doesn't look like they have any ammunition either. Granadine Berserks as well, so it's still, for an area that was so constricted and so, well, formulaic really in terms of the choke points, I'm quite surprised at just how chaotic this fight over here was. And I'm also kind of surprised that it seems like Dorwinion are the ones actually getting the better of it. With the quality that Rhudaur are now committing, maybe they can turn this fight around. Pikes and Frodrum Javelins and the like. And there goes the Rhudaur General though. Exactly the sort of thing which again turns the screw a bit on Rhudaur's morale. We'll see though. We will see. Even if Dorwinion are overall victorious, it will cost them quite a lot, so the amount of reinforcements they'll be able to send to their allies throughout the rest of the settlement, while not nothing, is still going to be limited. The unlocalised placement text once more. Rhovanion Hoplons on the front line, so the Rhovanion trying to fight fire with fire when it comes to more heavily armoured units, but unfortunately Isengard do have their Uruk-hai Berserkers over here to make a mockery of that fine armour of theirs. Sniper skirmishers trying to deal with what remains of the artillery crew. Looks like they are future-proofing a little bit though. A retreat is on the cards. Rhovikin archers firing into this blob over here, and I mean going after the Uruk-hai pikemen is definitely the right thing to do in my opinion. Uruk-hai infantry kind of sinking into the floor, but such is the way of things when you're talking about medieval 2 bridges. Dunland are moving forwards. Having been given that helping hand by Isengard, they're now on the way, and this is probably why the retreat is being ordered, because there are several positions in the settlement at this point which would be compromised. And vulnerability to attacks from the rear will start to be a concern. Artillery, stuck as it is, it's not ideal, but again, Isengard don't have a huge amount left. I think, fortunately for Y2K, he was actually allowed to retreat into a fairly decent position here, and Isengard didn't chase them all the way. And maybe that came about as a result of these Trolls of the White Hand dying en masse fairly quickly. So again, the Trolls actually not so effective in this battle replay. But ultimately, attacking from all angles at once is still going to be the play, as it pretty much always is. Dorwinion now, actually, this fight starting to be a little bit more structured. Dorwinion forming up a front line. It just depends on whether or not they have the quality and the survivability in the face of what is still some pretty nasty Rhudaur armor piercing. If they can win this. Still some support coming in. Rovirim Nobles on the way across from Medexa, so a little bit of cavalry support, even if Rhudaur do manage to get their way through this front line, which I think they will, based on the level of quality and the type of units that they have and the type of units Dorwinion have. But as soon as they do, a charge from the cavalry, which mostly bumps into the back of their own men. So that was always likely to be a little bit tricky. Still some Granadine Rangers over there. They were very effective earlier on. forcing some defending skirmishers to retreat. They don't have the ideal shot, but I mean, just trying to turn the screw on what it is largely just Elvalan infantry holding the line. Rhudaur, even a small victory here for Rhudaur will be good in the long run for the attackers. They've still got a fairly long way to go. This is a fairly isolated engagement for them. They're going to have to move a fairly long way back before they are in a position where they can help their allies on the periphery, but for now, Ortolano and Medexa ready for the next assault. Danish warband. Again, how much ammunition the attackers have left could be vital here. High crossbows. I mean, we've seen time and time again when attackers are in a position where they can use their own crossbows effectively, which we've seen more than once at this point in this battle. That very often leads to an attacker victory, and it's been pretty much the dwarves who have been on the receiving end of that, and with a level of dwarven quality that will be necessary if the defenders are to go on to win this. You can tell that the attackers are thinking about what they're targeting. Well, over here, still not a huge amount of movement here, to be honest. Winters might perhaps feeling as though he doesn't have enough manpower at this point to be able to bludgeon his way through the dwarves over here, and perhaps Y2K sees that he's going to be a little bit reluctant to move forward, and he's going to start siphoning off resources to help his allies. Dunlanding pikemen here leading the way, and that's again questionable for the reasons that we're already seeing, because it's very obvious that they were going to be targeted down. Trying to move backwards, but I mean, I would continue to fire with the slingers. You have a lot of ammunition with slingers. You're still going to be able to kill some of those pikes. Meanwhile, still have a small matter of this engagement over here, which is pretty much the only one that's still ongoing. And actually some Rhovanion units. Timely arrival actually from the reinforcements from the Rhovanion here, because it does mean that overall this is going to be a defensive victory. Only narrowly, but Dorwinion will still have a part to play later on in the battle as a result of this, and Rhudaur will not. Fair amount of resources committed over here as well, but yeah, the Rhovanion nobles, or Rhovanion nobles I should say, definitely earning their position on the battlefield now, chasing down units, taking advantage of completely undefended forces now. I mean, the unlocalized placement text are spears in melee. They tried to hide there even though they were still in melee. That's a bold move. But yeah, this is going to be the end of them, and they end up routing. The Rhudaur Rangers are already routing, so I think that's pretty much it for Rhudaur, unless they've got a unit or two with the main body of the army. Like I said, there's not much of Dorwinion left that's going to be reinforcing their allies. It's mostly Rhovanion over here now, but it's not nothing, and it is important that the defenders do get these victories throughout a siege battle like this, because otherwise it can really start to snowball against the defenders, as we've seen in the past. As soon as the attackers truly gain momentum, it can be very difficult for the defenders to regain it. There's actually still some Ferrodrim Javelins over here. One Elvalan Hammer Guardsman. But now, the Rhovanion will start to wave off. So again, they were sort of stacking up and getting into position and making themselves ready over here, Dunland and Isengard in the middle, but they will not be able to count on Rhudaur attacking from another angle. So pretty much all of the Rhovanion and Erebor over here are going to be able to focus their all their focus can be put into trying to stop this particular advance. More javelins. Again, it's the tribal levy skirmishers. The dwarves adding crossbow bolts into things as well, into the mix. Dunish Huskars. It's hard to get a read really on how well Dunland can really do in melee against an opposition, especially in the dwarves that you would consider to be superior. It is quite a tough situation for them to be in. Warband 2. Half-Orc Axegard moving forwards. Still the small matter of those crossbows as well. Big part of the attacking force today is their crossbows. We haven't really seen the Dunland ones do anything too dramatic at this point though. It's been mostly the Isengard ones that have been effective. Either axe throwers being committed to melee is usually a sign of a little bit of desperation. Erebor Legionaries still getting targeted. I mean, in all fairness, in spite of taking direct hits, these Erebor Legionaries are still reasonably healthy. But are they going to be able to withstand the numbers that are coming forth? Danish Huskarls in the advanced party. More armour piercing there. Over here, still nothing. I mean, Isengard are still just hanging around over here. They're waiting, but what are they actually waiting for? At the moment, there's only one active front. The smaller the battlefield, the less active fights. All of these things generally favour the defenders. Archers now in place as well. Mounted crossbows trying to do their thing. Many of them bloodied. Still seeing a lot of these, lots of slinger shots. Taking a lot of damage as well on the advance here as a result of units like that. 9-foot pikes trying to set themselves into position, but it's not the most organised pike line you'll ever see. They're going to need to trundle their way into position a little bit more effectively than this, I would suggest. Javelins from the attackers also being used. I mean, that's one thing that I would still be kind of worried about if I were the defenders. The fact that the attackers have been able to effectively use their own missiles. That often bodes ill in the long run. It's the sort of thing that you often can't see until close to the end. Or, I mean, no, it almost certainly is Rhudaur admitting defeat with nothing left to their name. Those Danish Huskarls did not last long at all. Heavy axemen of their calibre often don't if they're subject to ranged fire, and also their slightly lower melee defence can be exploited by a unit as good as the Erebor Legionaries. Still the Tribal Levy Slingers doing all that they can. There's one criticism you have of the Tribal Levy Slingers and the Tribal Levy Skirmishers is that their melee prowess is pretty limited, but they can just be a meat shield in melee when all is said and done. Victory is a distinct possibility. There's not many dwarves left on the front line, and this is a battle which is going to be decided, I think, by the back and forth between the skirmishers, throwing axes, as if on cue going after the mounted Ravenborn Wardens and vice versa, and then there's the Snaga skirmishers, there's still the slingers, crossbows, archers on all sides. And still, Isengard not keen on moving over here. The dwarves still have decent amounts of their name over here. Perhaps they're waiting and hoping for Y2K to send more reinforcements over here to the middle. What is the new only active fight on the field. Again, that kind of bodes ill for the attackers. Earlier on, Dorwinion Rhudaur was the only active fight. Now, it's this one in the middle, which is more important in all fairness. This, I think, is the decisive engagement on the field, but you're going to be trying to make the map bigger, if you're the attackers, so to speak. Erebor Legionaries moving forwards, and they will of course easily defeat battered half-orc spearguard like that. 200 Danish warband getting into place. Slingers of their own, the attackers. They haven't really been able to use the slingers, at least from what we've seen. They may have used them on the outer layer when you weren't looking, and that may have contributed to a rather rapid collapse of that particular front line. Wardens, so the crossbows on foot now. They're actually going after. Could go after the axe throwers, I suppose. Let's try the berserkers over there. Sons of Durin are a little bit further back. There's plenty of choices. But what is the right choice? The defenders, I think they'll be reasonably relaxed about all of this. 5-foot crossbows moving in, trying to use their own slingers now, but interrupted by a dwarven counter-attack. There's enough of them. I mean, they should be able to defeat the 9-foot crossbows. The Erebor legionaries, even with how depleted they are, will prove a tougher nut to crack. 4 Isengard, point blank, 3 pikes. Defeat seems certain. How many reinforcements do they have over here? I mean, they do have... They could go for a fairly comprehensive attack, but it would have to be Isengard led at this point. I think you'd have to say that this attack in the middle, Dunland have borne the brunt of quite a lot of the defenders' fury. And again, they're slightly lower defensive abilities, and their kit is not quite as good as Isengard, so struggling to maintain themselves just a little bit more. This, of course, will be a concern. Isengard Ballista carving through, getting many of the Blacklock engineers, also getting some Obsidian Guard in for the deal as well. So yeah, Y2K is going to have to move. Are we seeing... Well, we are actually seeing now some movement from Winter's Might. There's one unit of dwarves which were left behind. We should fairly easily deal with that. I mean, this is kind of interesting. The Uruk-hai crossbows have got a little like a bayonet now, and they use it as their melee weapon. It's kind of interesting. Guards of Orthanc moving in as well. I mean, that one unit though wasn't really the thing, I'm sure, which Isengard were worried about over here. I'm sure the thing that concerned them, Sons of Durin, Pikes, Obsidian Guard and all of that. We are closing in on the final 10k frames now, which makes sense based on the fact that both sides are going to be running their manpower reserves dry fairly soon, you would say, but we've yet to see a big commitment from the attackers. I think the attackers are the ones which will eventually try to force the issue, and it's just a case of how the defenders respond to that. Tribal Levy Slingers moving in. I mean, I think the Beastmen of Dunland should probably tear them apart in melee. They are at least standing in the way, and units in behind firing away with their skirmishers. There's actually not that much more settlement the defenders can pull back into. Really, it's the raised terrain over there which represents the final stand area. Dorwinion sending really what remains of their limited army in now as well, the Elvelyn infantry, so I think Dorwinion will probably end up falling by the wayside next, if indeed this is their only unit left. We are viewing... No, yeah, that's Rhovanion nobles. Snaga still firing away. I'd say this unit of Dunish Warband as well has struggled. The Obsidian Guard, though, moving in may have something to do with that. The Obsidian Guard should also do pretty well against these Beastmen. Maybe try and bail out these Tribal Levy Slingers who have been such a loyal servant to Medex's forces, but needs must, and everyone will now have to take up arms in melee. Both sides, of course, taking a ton of range damage, and it's going to be just who's less punch drunk come the end. Rolling that ballista forward into position once more. What is Tommy going to try and target here? There's a few things he could go for. Rhovanion Phalanx wouldn't be the worst thing. Rhovanion Nobles, not bad. Tribal Berserkers on the way across. That will be very handy for dealing with the armoured Uruk-hai. skirmishers. I mean, the Obsidian Guard getting in amongst these units over here is a big deal, I think, because if the attackers don't do anything about them, they will just continue to carve their way through these weaker forces, and you can see that the Uruk-hai crossbowmen are doing exactly the right thing and trying to target them down. Those crossbow bolts represent the best way for diffusing a potentially sticky situation. Forward comes some House of Ammunition Iron Foot axe throwers, quite a lot of them as well actually. I mean, the Nazkai are arriving from the other side, so it's all a little bit worrying. Rhovakin phalanx on the way forward as well. They'll be stacking up on the front line. I haven't really seen the Black Block Engineers do anything, but that may just be a case of missing them. Uruk-hai crossbows getting up onto the raised terrain. I don't know, I think this is another misjudgment here from Y2K, honestly. The trolls are here sending forward the pikes, but then having to retreat because of the crossbows up on the hill over here again. I think Winter's Might has used his ranged units pretty damn well. This would be a significant victory as well if a whole nother Isengard force starts attacking deep into the settlement from another angle. If there's one criticism, I would say that this almost certainly should have been happening way sooner than it ultimately has done, but better late than never. And the trolls at the forefront once more. There's always the chance that Dwarven crossbows also end up inflicting so much damage on Isengard that it ends up not being worth it. Although, the death of a general over here. That'll be Porto Leno's general. Victory seems certain though. They are managing to surround, and they will ultimately overwhelm this position over here. The addition of those tribal berserkers once again, and you've also got the Rhovakin nobles looking resplendent. Uruk-hai berserkers is not their ideal foe, but based on how bloodied the berserkers already are, it shouldn't take too much more work to finish them off. Sons of Durin on the way forward as well. I mean, you just get the sense that I don't know if the attackers are going to be able to withstand or keep this level of attrition up, but I also think the same about the defenders. It's been such a costly... I mean, all of these fights ultimately end the same way, with one very depleted army standing victorious over a completely dead army, but this has been a very costly fight, if that makes any sense. Rhovakin phalanx over here as well, having access to these solid pikes, Ironfoots and the phalanx. Going to be very, very handy, and I mean, when Snaga skirmishers are your sole melee combatant that remains, you know that you're in a reasonable amount of trouble. Uruk-hai crossbows. Rhovakin nobles forcing their way forwards. I mean, this didn't end too well for the Obsidian Guard in the end, but trying to go after these crossbows and shut them down may end up being the play. So many of these crossbows as well. Going after the ballista too. Certainly don't think it's the wrong move from Medexa by any means. Across comes some Uruk-hai crossbows to try and lend a hand, but we are talking about the most high tier of the Rhovanion infantry units, so it's going to take a little bit more than that, and yeah, we are seeing, I think, the defeat of the attackers in the middle, which is going to leave Winter's Might trying to do things solo. He is actually, you can see in the background, there goes an Isengard general, but you can see he is now arriving in the background over there, so that he is going to be able to try and bail out his allies in the middle. But I don't know, I think he may be arriving too late. Communication is going to be key here though. Y2K can't afford to just flee into the back end of the settlement. He isn't, which is good. Setting up a defensive line which his allies can then join him on. But are we about to see the first defender victory in these new patch previews? I think we probably are. I mean, Dragon Slayers are fighting, still a healthy amount of berserkers, pikes are getting surrounded. There's a lot of good quality and highly damaging units still here for the defenders. Ironfoot pikes. To be fair, these trolls will be good against the pikes. The Erebor legionaries will put up more of a fight in melee, in all fairness. As strong as these Dwarven units are, these are some pretty scary units. They are a little bit battered though. The Nazkai not at their peak, Trolls almost dead. Guards of Orthanc, if all of these units were fully healthy and they had a little bit more ready support from the Uruk-hai pikemen, I'd be very worried if I were the Dwarves, but based on the situation they might just be fine. The Wind Raider has 5 Morroquendi bows left. The poison projectiles will still be very useful after all. And also it means that Dorwinion are still active on the field. Axlar is on their way across. And they're crushing what remains of the middle Isengard army now, I think. I mean, they were retreating with some of their units, yeah, Uruk-hai archers, and there's still the Ravenborn units as well, which they still have to deal with. So the attacker's not going to make it easy. Obsidian Guard on the way forwards. Mighty K's Obsidian Guard as well. They were waiting a while to meet Winter's Might's forces in the fight, and now they will finally get their chance. Although it's actually the tribal berserkers that push their way to the front once again, proving to be absolutely vital to the Rhovanion's composition. Defeat seems certain. Isengard's general falls. I mean, morale is going to be the issue here. As we have a look, percentages are even, but the level of quality, I think, should be enough for the defenders to see themselves over the line. Those mounted Ravenborn Wardens and the dismounted variant of the same unit, those are the two which may throw a spanner in the works. And there's also the small matter of these trolls over here. Actually, they are proving to be a thorn in the side late on. Will the Blacklock Engineers be able to bring them down? I mean, they must be very, very wounded at this point. Morroquendi bows getting hounded also by the Dunland cavalry. Ooh. Ruffians using their javelins. The Dunland unit, I mean, that is a hefty amount of damage there. Time for crossbows here. It's close. The ballista being dealt with now. The Rhovanion nobles in behind enemy lines. I mean, we saw them put to good use in scouring Rhudaur from the field. I don't know if they're going to be able to do the same once more, given how depleted they are, but again, every little helps. In all fairness, the Snaga may very well end up routing with the middle cycle charging. If nothing else, it might make the javelins more difficult to use. Defeat seems certain. There's a lot of units moving themselves. These Blacklocks have kind of been abandoned. What's going on now? Ravenborn Wardens and crossbows. I mean, they are going to be fairly effective in melee here as well, but effective enough to beat berserkers and Rhovakin nobles, I don't know. The Rhovanion being tasked with trying to once again secure this middle location. Cavalry continuing to charge, cycle in and out, and they will, I think, ultimately end up routing those Snaga skirmishers, and that is a big deal. Those javelins routed from the field, and it was ultimately a very numerous unit of, albeit very weak, but still very present units on the field. And the dwarves still fighting very well on the front line, even considering the level of quality that was here. The Nazkai and the Berserkers have been dealt with though, and that would be the only thing that a unit like the Dragon Slayers would have pause with against Isengard. They're going to be able to absolutely slaughter their way through Snaga after all, and surely at this point, surely we're going to see a defending victory. I would suggest. And I think well deserved as well. Archers still doing their thing. It has been a battle very much decided by mostly ranged units. Here in the late game, of course, it has been a little bit more about that quality that the defenders still had at their disposal, but the building blocks for that were the ranged unit interplay. And you have to remember as well, actually, the attackers did do pretty well with their own skirmishes, and yet the defenders still look like they're going to go on to be victorious. So, very, very well done. Yeah. It was dead even, but now the defenders have pulled out a 3% lead. And also the kind of units that remain. Trolls. There's 2 Black Book Engineers left. They have finally killed the trolls, and there's only 2 of them remaining. But they'll take it. Snaga skirmishers leaving. I mean, if I was Winter's Might, there's not really a huge amount of point in trying to kite backwards. Even if you had full ammunition, I don't think you'd be able to kill off the entirety of the defending armies now. Not with 1 unit of Snaga skirmishers. The army is tiring, I don't say. Still with 16 Rosed Wardens. And they can try and charge in, but I really don't think that if they do, I think it's a little bit too little too late, unfortunately for them. It really is just clean up at this point. And I think once again we have seen how effective as a faction the Rhovanion can be. I think they're the ones that caught the eye the most. Dorwinion, I think it was more positionally that was the important thing for them rather than the actual units themselves. They did very well, pulling out that victory over Rhudaur on the flank. They definitely contributed. And the dwarves, we have seen the dwarven quality, especially towards the end, but in the early stages of the battle they were struggling a little bit actually, Erebor. Getting pulled apart rather by that initial assault from Isengard and Dunland. It's going to be those mounted wardens that are going to be the last unit, isn't it? How easy do the attackers want to make this then? Winter's Might Snaga, Erebor Legionaries taking a charge. The riders will always fall. Slowly but surely they are wavering as well, so I mean they're very likely to rout when all is said and done. Player of its defeat, so that'll be Tommy, one of the Isengard players. It is just now, I mean, it's the ×2 job, isn't it? There is no way. Maybe if the mounted wardens had ammunition as well. Mounted Ravenborn wardens do move in. Maybe lost 1, oh no, 2, 3. When they charge in at some point they are going to end up fleeing. Tribal Berserkers will get into melee with the Snaga. Will probably be enough to rout them eventually. Yeah, again, like this is the sort of thing where I don't really see the point. Like, you can try and pad your kill count out a little bit more, but ultimately it's going to be worth what, 1 or 2 kills, especially when you're talking about a unit as tanky as the Rhovanion nobles. Go ahead and rout. Everyone wants you to. Mounted Ravenborn Wardens. Are they going to be the last ones? I mean, they're going to charge into pikes, so they may charge into the rear of the pikes, but as soon as those pikes turn around, they're going to absolutely eviscerate those, yeah, they do rout. And that does mean that Isengard will be the last ones left on the field, so this kiting backwards has meant at least that Winter's Might is the last attacker left standing, but that was always going to be how it was. And there we have it. I don't know what to call this map still.
Our soldiers have fought and died well today.
This is something that I'll have to take some creative liberties with, like I said. But a big thank you to the Wound Raider for sending this one in. This is the second of his maps that we've seen on these patch previews. After all, we did see the mirror match of Rune sent in by him as well, which is another map that he created. This is the second, and we will, of course, the next battle we see actually will be the other one that he sent me as well, which is in the Gundabad Mountains. So it's a kind of similar situation to this, albeit it is a dwarven attack on orcish positions. So role reversal really, but again it's got that dwarven central theme to it, just like this one did. And finally we see a defender victory as well, so I'm sure that people will be pleased with that. Let's see what did the damage then for Dorwinion, who, to be fair, the most significant contributions of Dorwinion were in the first half of the battle really. Later on they were really just a footnote here, and the Wound Raider was still contributing, but obviously it was the other players that had to really take up the slack after the rather Pyrrhic victory against Rhudaur on the side. But plenty of damage done by those Morroquendi units. As you would expect, that elven damage against the relatively flimsy Rhudaur armour was always going to be a recipe for success for Dorwinion. Good kills actually on the Elvelyn infantry. I mean, when you think about the rank and file of Rhudaur, the non-armour-piercing swordsmen and clansmen, the Elvelyn are going to have the better of them, so it's not too surprising to see these kind of numbers, especially given that Rhudaur are a more numbers-heavy faction anyway. River Patrol did okay, I suppose. Morroquendi Pikes, the solid front line. Elvelyn Hammerguard probably would have been the play to bring the Morroquendi if he had known he was definitely going to be up against Rhudaur, but you can't be sure of that, and the Elvelyn Hammerguard would have been the better pick against Isengard had it come down to that. So there is that to consider. But yeah, all around decent performances. Like I said, I think the Rhovanion really did catch the eye once again. They do have the biggest kill count, but that's not really what I'm referring to here. I think the build of their faction, the tribal units, the throwing projectiles, and then the solid, more heavily armoured units, the cavalry, I think all around they are actually pretty effective and pretty well built. And they obviously have that similarity with Dorwinion in the sense they've got like two different classes of unit, you know, in that sense. But I think actually the Rhovanion are probably slightly easier to play than Dorwinion. But on this occasion, of course, they share the spoils of victory, and as I mentioned earlier, the dwarves also struggled a little bit early on, but we really did get to see their quality towards the end. And if I were to have a criticism of how the attackers approached this one, I think it was more a case of, again, they didn't make the battlefield as big as they could have done, and too often we were seeing one engagement be the only one active on the field when there should be multiple. When you're the attackers, you should be trying to stretch the defenders. You shouldn't be allowing them to reinforce different parts of the battlefield like they were able to. Y2K was able to siphon dwarven units off because Winter's Might wasn't moving forward, and Medexa was able to send some forces over to help the Wound Raider against Rhudaur because Isengard and Dunland in the middle were delaying their assault a bit. And these sorts of things did add up in the end. It was a closely run thing, and if any one of those things hadn't been the case, we may well be staring down the barrel of yet another attacker victory. But as it is, the defenders finally have one. So yeah, like I said, we'll be seeing another one from the Wound Raider up next, and following on from that, I think we will be doing possibly the last battle replay that I'm going to show on the old patch of the game, because most of what I get sent now is stuff that's from the test build, and like I said, we're going for more of a quality over quantity approach now with these replays, so very often there will only be one a week, and then the Wednesday slot will be something else. So with that in mind, I don't really feel as though there's a huge necessity to do much from the old patch anymore, but I do want to do one final replay on it, and so those are the next two that are going to be coming out, and here and there we may be doing some other bits and pieces as well, but this is going to be one of the last videos I record before I go away for work once again, so we'll just have to see what things are like on the other side of this next few weeks. But yeah, big thank you to the Wound Raider once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is